Good evening and welcome. At this time, I'll call to order Monday, September the 9th, 2024 regular scheduled City of Clemson Planning Commission meeting. This meeting is being live streamed and recorded on the City of Clemson's YouTube channel. I'd like to remind everybody, the Planning Commission is a volunteer committee which is appointed by City Council. It serves as an advisory board in the planning and development of our city. We are not employees of the City of Clemson. At this time, I will introduce our commissioners. Commissioner Hyatt. I'm Herb Tyler, the chair. Commissioner Crowley, Commissioner Thaxton, and tonight we are missing Commissioner Rice due to an issue and Commissioner Carranza due to a family emergency. Commissioner Burton is coming in, and we do have a quorum. At this time, I would love to introduce our administrative staff from Planning Department. Nathan Woods, who's the director. Art Holbrook, city planner. I'd like to introduce Aaron O'Kelly, who is helping us here. Special thanks to Kelly Roach. I'd like to introduce Jacob Peabody. And I'd also like to introduce in just a little bit Ethan from our stormwater management. At this time, we're going to open our public session. And according to City of Clemson Commission planning rules of procedures, members of the public can address this body at this time with non-agenda related items that are within our purview. Are there anybody here like to address a commission? Seeing none, do we have any submitted through the website or email? Seeing none, we will close that part of our meeting. So we'll go ahead and move on to the adoption of our minutes from the August 12th, 2024 regular meeting. Have all the commissioners had an opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any edits or omissions that are noted? Okay, is there a motion?
I vote to approve the meeting minutes from Monday, August 12th, Planning Commission meeting as presented.
Second. Second. Call for a total vote. Call for a total vote. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed? Seeing none, the minutes are passed. One of the things right before we get started today that I wanted to mention, and we have a slide up here. We mentioned over the last two meetings education sessions. There are many people who throughout the community want to learn more, and we've been having those. We have two left, one on September 10th at Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, which is out at Patrick Square, and one at the Clemson Fire Station. I know a couple of people have joined these meetings. Commissioner Hyatt, what did you think?
I went to the one at Clemson Elementary School. I was surprised at the number of people that are interested and really engaged in the community. People had a lot of questions. I feel like it was just good information for the community to hear. Sometimes we don't have as much control as they think that planning and zoning and the comp plan has. So, I think it was a good meeting. I don't know. Did anybody else?
What about you, Commissioner Crowley?
I thought it was good. I thought it was informative. It's a good dive into what planning and the Planning Commission are all about, and an overview of what we can and can't regulate, and just a pretty good introductory course into if you want more information about this, this, and this, here's where we go.
So I would encourage people to please come and learn, but I do want to remind, just like I did at last meeting, and as it said, it's educational sessions. And we take this from the MASC and from the state law that regulated it. So a very basic overview. And from the response so far that we've gotten, there have been numerous people who have been interested. So I just wanted to bring that up and what it is. And just thank everybody for supporting that. Maybe in the future, if the community wants it, we can dive deeper. So now, I'd like to ask Ethan Barnett to come up. If y'all remember, we asked for an overview, and Nathan said they would arrange about stormwater management within the city.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Do I need to sign in?
Very good.
All right. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak to you guys. Like you said, Nathan and Art came to me a few weeks ago, said you guys were having some questions brought up during your meetings involving stormwater, so I'm here to give an overview of our stormwater division and kind of what we do. It's not going to be in everything of what we do because we would be here for a long period of time, and I'm going to try to be as brief as I can. But I'm mainly going to focus on as related, obviously, to development and planning. So my name is Ethan Barnett. I am the stormwater manager for the city of Clemson. I started working here in January of 2021. Went to Clemson for my bachelor's degree, graduated in 2018. I got my master's doing soil and erosion control research for construction sites in 2020. I actually stuck around another semester and taught because people retired and they didn't have anybody to cover classes during the fall of 20 and then started here. So that's, my college career is kind of what got me into stormwater, and that's kind of why I do what I do. So I got some talking points and then we'll take some questions, so just bear with me. The city became what's known as an MS4 or a municipal separate storm sewer system in 2015, okay? So basically what that means is when you get to a population versus density ratio, and there's an official definition that I'm not going to bore you with, that you become an urbanized area. That's what they call you. They either let you volunteer or eventually will tell you that you have to come up with a stormwater management program. And by they, I mean the state. Formerly, they were South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. They recently split into two organizations. It's now South Carolina Department of Environmental Services. That's who runs that from the state level in the state. So basically, a good chunk of my responsibilities is keeping the city compliant with its MS4 permit. And so the MS4 permit basically says you have a lot of people in a smaller area, you have a lot of development, all that kind of stuff, and you've got to come up with a way to manage your stormwater to keep our water bodies healthy as possible. Okay? So that's the big chunk of my job of what I do. And we do that by what's known as minimum control measures, and there's 6 of them. The first 2 are basically involving the public. It's public education and outreach on stormwater impacts and public involvement and participation. Okay? We are members of what's known as the Anderson-Pickens County Stormwater Partners, which is a conglomeration of MS4s. It's us, Clemson University, City of Easley, Anderson County, Pickens County, there's several others. But basically, we pull together with Clemson University Extension to help promote stormwater outreach through that consortium, basically. So the Extension Service really kind of does a lot of it for us, but we help support it, we sponsor it, we coordinate events with them. They're not always here in the city, sometimes they are, because there's a lot of MS4s. And so that's how we satisfy those 2 requirements. And I'd be happy to, they have a whole web page that talks about all that. I'd be happy to provide that if you guys would like to look into that further. The third one is illicit discharge and detection elimination. Illicit discharge is anything that isn't stormwater going down the drain. That's what we don't want. That's the whole principle of what we do. So that could be anything from sediment from a construction site, somebody, as you can imagine, dumping chemicals down a drain, or even people not picking up after their pets. In fact, pet waste does cause a significant amount of E. coli runoff. So we're tasked with finding those getting those cleaned up, getting them corrected, and enforcing the violations on whoever committed it. The fourth one, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time, is construction site runoff management program and our ordinances involving that. I'm not really going to talk a lot about it right now because we're going to hit it throughout the rest of this talk. But that's a big one. The fifth one is post-construction stormwater management program. Basically what that means is a lot of times your developments, they have to manage their stormwater via detention ponds or retention ponds or some sort of design to manage that increase in the runoff rate. So the whole point is, over time, they can, if they're not, maintained, they don't work. And so we inspect them on a pretty much an annual basis to ensure they're cleaned and functioning and working as they're supposed to. And then the fifth one, this one, sometimes it's my favorite, is pollution prevention and good housekeeping of municipal operations. So that's when I get to go around to the other departments and tell them what they're not doing right when it comes to stormwater and make sure we're not violating our own rules. So they can love me sometimes when I show up. And then some of what I do is also help supervise the operations and maintenance of the stormwater division. So ditch cleaning, catch basin installation, pipe installation, solving drainage problems along city-owned roads, that kind of stuff. But we're not going to talk too much about that. So a lot of this stems from regulations, right? And it all really dates back to the Clean Water Act of 1972. That's the federal law that established a lot of this. It's where it was born. And that was in response to, throughout the decades prior, there was a common phrase that was often said that was dilution is the solution. So if you could dilute the pollutant enough, you may have heard that before, it wouldn't be a problem. Well, when a couple of rivers caught on fire, clearly that wasn't the case. So that's where a lot of this stems from. So that's from the federal level, right? All right, so then if we go to the state level, there's the Stormwater Management and Sediment Reduction Act of 1991. That's for South Carolina. It's in the Code of Laws. And basically that kind of reciprocated a lot from the Clean Water Act in this state. It's not every piece of it. But it also established what used to be DEC, is now known as DES. And they established the regulations, which, or the standards. It's Regulation 72-300. It's the standards for stormwater management and sediment reduction. So that's what the guiding book is when it comes to development and managing stormwater and sediment when it comes to development. We, as a city, as an MS4, we created our own ordinance. So even from the local level, and it basically reciprocates a lot of the state law. We do have a little bit of differences. I'm not going to touch on all of them tonight because we'd be here for a long time, but there are some fine tweaking that we do to make it more specific for our municipality. And that's in our code of ordinance. It's titled the Stormwater Management Ordinance, and it's in the Utilities chapter. I think it's chapter 11, in case you want to look at that. And so a part of that, part of being an MS4, getting back to that MCM4, is managing the development, right? Development comes in, there's a good chance it's going to increase runoff. So we have actually a stormwater design manual. It's a standalone design manual for designing stormwater systems in the city of Clemson. And I'll be happy to provide it. It's about 104 pages, and it guides the project engineers and developers through what we expect to see and what we would approve as a project, right? And so it can do anything from the stormwater management plans to the detention pond designs to the water quality designs, all that kind of stuff. But there's two main aspects I want to touch on today, and they're tied in there with it and into our regulations. It's the water quantity aspect and the water quality aspect, okay? So when I say water quantity, I mean obviously the amount, right? So when you do a project, and it would have to be a project that would be a greater than an acre of disturbance that would require this. And you have to model what it currently looks like, right? So if you have an acre of trees, you model it as an acre of trees. Now there's a lot more to it. You look at the soil type and all this other, and topography and all that kind of stuff. But for the simplicity, to be simplistic about it, that's what you do. Then you say, okay, well, I'm going to put whatever your development is here. You model it again. And that peak increase in the rate, that's what you have to mitigate, okay? And it's the peak increase in the rate of runoff for the 2-year 24-hour storm and the 10-year 24-hour storm. That is exactly what comes from DES. We reciprocated those requirements in our design manual, and that's what we use right now. And so when I do want to touch on what that means. So 2-year and 10-year and 100-year, you hear all this, doesn't mean that's always going to happen every 2 years, every 10 years, every 100 years. It's more of a probability. It says based off statistics, what we've gathered, the data we have, you would expect to see this type of storm on this frequency. But in reality, they can happen consecutive days. It doesn't matter. And then the second piece is the 24-hour. That's the duration. So that means from first raindrop to last raindrop. That's the time period. Storms, it's a science, but they're not perfect. I've never seen one model or match exactly a hydro curve. I mean, I'm just be honest. And so you can have 2-year 30-minute storms, 10-year 4-hour storms. They don't match up exactly, but that's the best principles that the state has decided to use, and we have as well. So they model the pre and the post for those storm events, and that peak increase in the rate, so it's a cubic feet per second, that's what has to be mitigated. And typically that's done through, in our area, detention ponds. A lot of times you'll see retention ponds on the coast. Those are ponds that have water in them all the time, and then they're designed to get higher. That's because they have a lot higher groundwater table than we do. A lot of times it's a detention pond here. Sometimes they're underground detention ponds, pipes, concrete vaults, whatever. And those are designed per our requirements to mitigate that. We also require that they analyze the 100-year 24-hour storm to assess downstream conditions on our system and other people's property. Okay? So that's the water quantity aspect. Next is the water quality aspect. And when I say water quality, I don't want you guys to think like a wastewater treatment plant where we collect all the water and we run it through a whole system and discharge it out. That's not quite it. I wish we could, but there's way too much. When it rains, it's way too much volume to do that. So what we require is any project that disturbs greater than 0.75 acres in the city has to install some sort of permanent water quality structure. Now, the design manual goes through everything you could pick. But a lot of times, if people are doing detention ponds, they size it and design it to capture the first inch of runoff, which is known as the first flush principle based off research. And what that states is the first flush, the first inch, has the majority of the pollutants in it, almost 90 to 95% of the runoff. So they design it to capture that and let that slowly infiltrate into the ground, and then they can remove the trash, the sediment, anything that's collected in the bottom of the pond. Okay. There are other options, manufactured devices like vortex separators. That's a big word. Basically, they spin the water a certain way to capture trash. In fact, a lot of restaurants do those. A lot of restaurants also do bag filters to capture trash, like cups and straws and all this kind of stuff. So anything that disturbs greater than 3/4 of an acre has to put one of these in the system. It's non-negotiable on that. Okay. So that's kind of our design requirements. All right. So now I'm going to talk you through a permit process, what that could look like, and a lot of this will kind of overlap. So we get a lot of calls from developers. I know Nathan does for sure, and Art and Jake. But they call me too, and they say, hey, we know this piece of property may be going up or whatever. We're thinking about doing this. What would it take? And so we're constantly emailing back, phone calls. We have pre-design meetings to say, hey, and basically I just tell them what I tell you, or I give them the design manual, so it has to meet this perspective. But eventually, if it goes to a full-blown project, they'll submit a grading permit, or they'll apply for a grading permit. We have 3 classifications of grading permits, okay? It's class 1, 2, and 3. So class 1s are anywhere from 0.01 disturbance to a half acre, so 0.50. And any single family residential that's an infill project, not a subdivision, but one in an older neighborhood, somebody had a lot, they decided to subdivide it or what have you. Those are actually exempt from the water quantity and quality requirements in the state law, the single family one-offs. That's why they're handled in a class 1, and they're exempt from us as well. The Class 2 permit is anywhere from 0.51 acres to 2 acres. Those can see, you can have full-blown NPDES permitted projects, which I'm gonna touch on in a little bit in just a minute, or they could be just smaller commercial projects, all right? So those are kind of the gray area. That's where things can get a little hairy. And then Class 3s are anything 2 acres and up in disturbance. And those are full-blown NPDES permitted projects. It's a whole process for those. And so during that, they submit for a grading permit. Well, part of that MCM4, the Construction Site Runoff Management Program, we actually have designated review authority from DES. So they gave it to us. We review the projects here at the City of Clemson. I'm the primary reviewer for the city, but when it comes to large projects, we bring in our other reviewers. Dustin Hayes, our Assistant Utilities Director, and Nathan Hinkle, our City Engineer. We get together as a team and review all these plans. And they're not just submitting civil drawings, I will say that. They often have to submit what's known as a Comprehensive Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan, or a CSWIP. Okay? Those are very long, detailed documents that say how they're going to manage their stormwater management and soil and erosion control throughout the life of the project, from the time the first bucket digs to somebody moves in, or whatever closes the project. And so those are with the actual physical plan set for the contractors to build. And so we go through paragraph by paragraph and critique it and send comments back for changes. And if you don't meet our requirements, you don't get a permit. And so you don't get a permit, you don't dig. That's the way it goes. And so that can take a while. Sometimes I've never seen one that's been perfect off the start. But sometimes they can take months. Sometimes they can take a month. And it just depends. It's very project specific. So then, once they meet our requirements, we send an approval letter down to DES, and they give it an NPDES project number. And that stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That stems back to that Clean Water Act. It's a program to help restore the water bodies and waterways back to their original condition as best as we can. So once DES issues it a number, we have a pre-construction conference. It's required. I know you go to a lot of them. Most of the city staff ends up going to them. All contractors end up going to them. Anybody, the permittee, anybody involved in the project can't start till we have that conference. And we go on site and we lay the plans out and the C-SWIP out, and we go through it and say, this is what we expect, this is what has been approved, and this is how it's going to be done. And if there's issues, then we're going to have a conversation that could get ramped up to a violation. Okay. After that conference, we issue the permit. They're allowed to start digging. During the life of the project, there's two types of inspections that occur. Right? The contractor is required to do what's known as SEPSCI inspections. Those are certified erosion prevention and sediment control inspections. Right? Those occur every 7 days with no time period between it greater than 9 days, and after every rainfall greater than an inch. Okay? The purpose of those is, as part of that C-SWIP, they use what's known as best management practices to help manage, or BMP, to help manage the runoff during construction, because that's when it's most susceptible, right, to creating a problem, sediment leaving site, going into a creek or the lake. They inspect those to make sure they're not only installed properly, maintained, and in the right place, because it would shock you sometimes what gets missed. You would think it would be pretty straightforward, but sometimes things get missed. So they do that, give that to the permittee and the contractor. They are supposed to fix what is on those inspection reports. The second inspection is what's known as an MS4 inspection. That's where I come in. Those are required once a month. To be honest with you, generally it's more like every 2 to 3 weeks. I do all the inspections in the city currently. We're actually working on trying to get an inspector hired to help me out on some of this. But basically, I go around, not only inspect the site, just like the SEPSCI inspector, but I inspect the reports of the SEPSCI inspector to make sure not only is he or she are doing their job, they're also communicating that to the permittee and the contractor. Because it doesn't do any good if they do an inspection and just stick it in the job box and no one knows, and then it rains, and then you got sediment washing down the road because somebody didn't put in a sediment trap or a series of ditch checks or whatever the device is being used to control the sediment. So basically, I tell them what they also have to fix if there's anything, and then they get a timeline. If they fix it, we're good. If they don't, then they can get violations. And eventually, we will get to a stop work order, which I have issued several of those. I don't like to, but it's what happens sometimes. So that process goes on through the life of the project, whether it's 6 months, 1 month, 2 years, whatever. Eventually, we get to closure. And so basically, at closure, we require that they submit a set of as-built that shows any storm sewer system they built. It was built the way it was designed. The pond that they constructed, if it's there, if it was required, is built as it was designed and will function as it was designed. The site is stabilized, so there shouldn't be any additional sediment leaving site. Silt fence is removed, all that kind of stuff. They don't get a closure or sign off until that happens, from me. I'm only one of the people they need to sign off from, but that's all, a lot of that is what that goes into. And so then eventually the permit will close once the building is done. And once everything's stabilized, it becomes, I get a little more relaxed because usually when there's grass growing, there's less chance for erosion. I will say that. But then it reverts to our post-construction program where we will inspect that device on an annual basis. So that's kind of what I do in a nutshell. I know it's a lot of information. I tried to make it as succinct as possible, but I appreciate you guys letting me come speak to you, and I would love to take any questions if you guys may have.
I appreciate you coming. This was very good information. The 110-page document that you give developers that say how that you want the drainage or stormwater management.
The design.
Who designed that? Where did that come from?
So that was kind of a conglomeration that was put together by the former stormwater manager, now city engineer Nathan Hinkle, when he was doing my job. And he kind of pulled it together from several different municipalities. Both he pulled a lot from the state, from DES, but he also, I think he pulled some from the city of Charlotte, city of Columbia, and there's a couple of others. I will say this, that was in December of 15. We are actively looking to do a review or an update to it.
Okay.
It's still, it's been less than a decade, but things have changed, and it does need some fine tuning. I've actually kind of been working on it for a few months, but as things come up, it kind of gets put to the back burner. But we're going to try to get something out in the next year as a more official or a new update, because it does need some tweaking. But that's
Because we're only as good as what we're requiring.
that is correct. Yeah,
to-
I'm required to enforce the regulations and requirements we have. Nothing higher than that.
I have another question. Okay. What you mentioned, like a single family lot is not. Did I hear that right? That you don't necessarily manage the runoff and construction of that?
No.
Okay.
They have to get a permit, and
Okay.
they have to manage their runoff and their potential for soil erosion. They are not required to do the full C-SWIP like you would see in a large subdivision project.
Okay.
They are not exempt. They're exempt from the water quantity, the detention requirements, and typically the water quality, because most of the time they don't grade 0.75 acres to do a single-family house in this city.
Okay. And then where the university meets city property. How is and this may not be part of what you're supposed to be presenting, but how is our relationship with the university? Because there's going to be university stormwater runoff into city and vice versa. So how do y'all manage that?
Yeah, so they're an MS4, just like us. They have their own version of me. His name's Billy Bolter, great guy. We talk.
I know.
Yeah, we talk at least monthly, if not almost weekly, I'll be honest with you. There's only so much that can be done from that kind of level. because water is still eventually, I hate to say this, but it will run downhill. I mean, that's where it's gonna go. If there's a creek somewhere, that's where it's gonna wanna go. But we communicate greatly, so we try to make sure any project they plan doesn't have an adverse effect on our citizens. Any project we plan doesn't have an adverse effect on their property.
Okay.
If I can just add, being an employee of the university, that is one of the annual required trainings that I have to do every year, is on the MS4 for the university, of making sure that anything that we do in our department is in compliance and not going down
I mean, I
the
know
drains.
areas that are not in compliance, so that isn't totally, you can do training and still not be compliant. So I just didn't know how our relationship with the city was.
It is a good relationship. Now, I mean, they are their own municipality. I have no legal recourse. I can't go onto the university property and say, hey, you have to fix that. It's outside of my jurisdiction.
Okay,
But the relationship is good.
good, okay.
Tanya, I'll add too, we meet, I mean, they talk all the time, just like I talk to my counterpart at the university all the time, but we also have a, what do you call that, Ethan, quarterly meeting where it's all
Yeah.
their facility staff and all stormwater and all building and all planning. And then Andy goes, so I take my staff, Nathan and Ethan, and then there's probably 25 of us in a room where we're talking projects that abut up to one another or may have an effect on one another in some way.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Do those manuals, so you were talking about the city manual, is it pretty close to what the university has in place for the requirements for any kind of construction? Or is there a lot of disparity between the two?
Well, so you gotta think about it like this. The university, they don't have outside developers coming to apply to build inside their limits. They do their own designs or pay a firm in-house. So they don't really have a public-facing design manual from my understanding. They have project engineers, they have capital project managers, they work with the engineers they hire to design whatever projects they do. So I'm sure they have something. I can look into that. I've never seen a Clemson University stormwater design manual though.
Okay,
But I'm sure they have something at the staff level.
okay.
Anybody else with questions?
Just a quick follow-up, and this isn't going to turn into a Clemson University thing, I promise. But I just thought about it. So one of the main differences with them versus us would be here, like there's a 3-acre development, you got to contain everything in there. Whereas there, if they're building a new building, since it's all inclusive, they may be able to say, okay, we can run this off over here because it's still our property. In other words, it's not, do they still have to contain, like, oh, here's the building site, I have to contain it here, or can they say like, oh, 200 yards away is this, well, we're gonna divert this or put our retention pond over there because it's all their property? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's fine.
I mean, I will say this: I don't work for them. So
Yeah, that's why I just didn't know if you know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yeah, they probably could do that because they are the sole property owner.
Okay.
Versus what we face, where you have parcels of different owners.
Yeah, okay.
But they still have to go through
Yeah, they still have.
DES.
Yeah, they have,
Right.
they have to
To
do.
meet those classifications, so if they did that would become a part of the project
Yeah.
the moment they expanded it. So it couldn't be a temporary.
No, I just meant that like where somebody might say, oh, this, like with the parking deck they're building it, I don't even have any clue how any of that's managed or anything. I haven't looked into it at all. But like if they're like, oh, we were gonna do the pond over here, or I didn't see how the stormwater was being managed or where it was going or this or that, and it's next to the lake, like, well, yeah, because they ran it over here because they own that property and we can do that, whereas the developer can't, run it over to the neighbor's property and say, I'm gonna put my water over there because it's not their property.
Yeah, I will say this. I mean, yes, they're the property owners. They can design and manage it. If they want to set a pond somewhere else that doesn't quite necessarily, as long as the drainage isn't adversely, because they're not going to want to degrade their own property, right?
Right.
But yeah, they could do they call it a trade or a swap or a credit. But if you go down perimeter, a good example of kind of what you're talking about, that big water feature on the right, it's not for water quantity, it's a quality only, but they built that to help with some of their areas where they couldn't meet their quality requirements, from my understanding, talking with Billy. So it treats a lot more of the runoff because they can funnel more in that area versus small small quality requirements throughout each building, is my understanding. But again, they don't send plans, I mean,
No, just,
if it abuts, we look at plans together, but I have no.
just with projects happening so close in proximity, just in case people watch for my own, like, understanding of why this project may look one way on our side of the road, and a project may look different on the other side of the road.
That's true.
Like, oh, they don't have to, well, yeah, they're doing it, they're just doing it different because they're not bound by the same things.
Correct. And I will say this, just because you see a development go up, if you don't see a pond, it doesn't mean it's not there. There's a lot of underground ponds in the city, especially towards the downtown area, because land is at a premium, I guess is the best way to say that. So they build it underneath.
Any other
I
questions?
have another question.
Sure.
I love this.
This is the time.
So I don't have to sit here and Google and be on my phone, the difference between detention and retention. I know retention in lower, I know you described that, but what is a detention pond?
So they basically both offset that peak flow. The way, and honestly in the industry, it's kind of on how you brought up older views versus newer views. But detention is basically a dry pond. It's primarily dry unless it rains. Retention means it retains water permanently. So there's a permanent water level, and then they design the pond to gain elevation when the water flushes in, and then it will mitigate it going out. That's the main difference, to be honest with you.
And
We don't have a lot of those here,
of the retention.
of retention.
Yeah.
That's correct.
So is there anything about like the vegetation in those detention ponds?
Yeah.
Like having to keep it and like
Yeah, you have to
clear?
maintain that's one of the requirements of the post-construction. You have to maintain its health. I mean, it can't just grow up like a forest, because then it's not gonna work as like it's supposed to. So that's why they get inspected. They're supposed to be mowed at minimum, if it's a grass pond, minimum once a year. Typically, it's more like twice a year. We send out notes with our inspection reports about, hey, this is what you should be doing, all that kind of stuff. And because vegetation is a premium, because more roots in the soil, less erosion. That's the best thing for those ponds.
Any other questions?
I'm done.
Do it.
I'm going to add that, can you talk about how we handle when a developer needs like 408-412 is a good example. They pay for their own off-site stormwater infrastructure when it needs an upgrade to take the stormwater off-site. I think that's kind of one of the things we've had a couple questions about in the planning department recently.
Sure. Yeah, so a part of that analysis that we do is we also look at our downstream, because if you send a bunch of water that we can't manage as a city in our roads, it's going to be a problem, right? So we look at analysis of where we hook in, and if we can't if it can't handle the development, they're responsible for upgrading the system to handle that.
So we extract that money. I think there's a lot of times some misnomers that the city then takes care of that, paying that doesn't happen. The developer pays for that. And then the other thing I'm going to add, obviously, that was awesome. But obviously Ethan's very smart, and he seems super nice tonight, but when things go wrong, like we're very quick to, most of the time when a job site gets shut down, I can think in Tanya's neighborhood it happened recently with those two homes up front, but not shut down, but like most of the time it's tracking off-site, mud tracking off-site, or some sort of I would say it's erosion silt fence failure.
Yeah, they didn't.
9 times out of 10, that's what it is. And so in those moments, he's not as nice as he seems tonight. And that goes through, to even get to the point where you are grading a site, like he said, can take, if you come in with the right documents, it can be turned around very fast. But a lot of times that's back and forth for months before a project ever starts. And I just don't think a lot of people realize the amount of work that goes through Ethan, not to mention Jake Bart, Nathan Hinkle, and our utilities team before a shovel's ever put in the ground. And then after the fact, it's constant monitoring, especially if you get in a wet season like we will here in November, December. Ethan gets, where the rest of us are, hitting the holidays, Ethan's running around crazy because you have to monitor that stormwater constantly to make sure that there aren't those failures. So I'm really thankful because we approve stuff, but then they're faced with checking it on the back end the entire time. So we got a good team on that side as well that works in tandem with our department.
Yeah, and I will say this, I'm housed in the utilities department, because stormwater is put in the utilities ordinance, it's functioned and kind of operates as a utility, but we talk almost every day. I talk with Nathan Hinkle pretty much every day. I mean, it's the overlap is, you wouldn't believe. So there's nothing that really goes on and, that we're not aware of.
Yeah, and Ethan's been here longer than I have, obviously, but long enough too to where, you're like your normal local developer, home builders and things, just reach out to him directly for things. And then as we get into these larger projects, obviously he has the professionalism and personality to be able to talk with those developers to get things right because of the way our limited land supply, a lot of the sites that we have available or left to develop or redevelopment are super challenging from a stormwater standpoint. So a lot of times it sits in Ethan's office probably longer for review than most any others. So
I try to be as quick, but when I do reviews, especially large projects, I go through it 3 or 4 times. I mean, it can, if I total it all up, it can take me a full 8 hours or more on some of these larger ones. Because those C-SWIPs, those things are easily 150 pages plus, sometimes 350 pages. And we go through them to make sure they are meet our compliance.
So now, are y'all ever, even though you've got the power of DES, do they ever come and inspect you guys?
That's a good question. They are supposed to do an audit. Okay. The MS4 permit, so basically the MS4 permit's a state permit. We apply for our coverage. We have our own little permit number. It actually expired about 4 years ago, but they passed continuing resolution to keep it active until they can issue a new state permit, which sets the new standards, which then guides us on how we are supposed to act and our regulations we're supposed to enforce. To this date, we have not been audited. But I talk with, what's his name, John Poole down in stormwater permitting for DES all the time. There's a good Arturo, I can't remember his last name. He was the head of the MS4 program for DES. He just retired. I believe Roxanne is taking over for him in the interim and potentially permanently. I know them because we actually, it's funny, we have a municipal association of stormwater managers. We actually met last Thursday down in Columbia. We meet quarterly. So we talk. I talk with people from the coast. I talk with Kyle Bennett, who's the stormwater manager for Pickens County, all the time. I talk with people from Columbia because it's a never evolving industry that we try to stay up to date with. But to answer your question, they are supposed to come audit us. We have not been audited.
And I'm sure they will. I think, in all fairness, because I deal with what used to be DHEC in some form, they have branched out and taken a lot of responsibilities and put them in new divisions. So like in the food areas now in the Department of Agriculture, where I used to get inspected, but they've done that with a ton of different things that DHEC was responsible for. So that's in all fairness of them getting organized to be able to put in the new procedures in place. But I assure you, they will come for an audit.
Yep, and I would actually, I kind of want one because it's a report card, right? We've been doing this since 2015 and we haven't been graded. I think we're pretty good, but we have deficient areas and we want those to be pointed out and critiqued so we can get better. That's the way I operate. I will say, this is kind of in line, but kind of not. When we do a city project, if I'm the plan reviewer, I'm not involved in the design. Okay? I stay totally out of that so I can look at it with a fresh set of eyes and critique it. That is one that isn't, it's not a requirement, but it's one thing that we do as a policy as staff because we just don't want that potential conflict of something.
Gotcha.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
So say I'm going to have one after you.
So back to what you were saying about the off-site option, can you explain what that really means? Like they're paying for these
So-
upgrades for it to be off-site, what does that look like?
Use 408, 412 as an example. I think it's a good one.
So 408 and 412,
College.
College Avenue, the pipes that flow down Kiwi Trail to the box culvert that's there, that takes it out to Lake Harbor, couldn't handle the flow.
Okay.
So they had to dig it up and put it in with a larger pipe.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of the best.
Right,
best
so
case.
it went, had a bore undercut, or they
They
bored?
have not bored yet. Did wait until
So it
December.
was undercut. So I don't know if you saw a couple weeks ago, Kiwi Trail was shut down because that was stormwater infrastructure that they were paying for to upgrade. And so in December, when school's out, they will bore under the road the larger pipe to set the larger pipe to get all the infrastructure ready to go. And that was through their engineering calculations and Ethan's checks and calculations that what the current infrastructure there, because there is a current pipe there, couldn't handle the increased flow. Yeah.
And so everything downstream of them would benefit from this, but,
From their upgrade.
or is it just
Well,
them?
there are other parcels that tie into that, correct?
You can tie into it, yeah.
And
But
then any
again,
future development on that side, absolutely.
Would
Yeah.
benefit from
Yeah.
that? Okay.
yeah, but again, it may have to be upgraded again. Depends on what they're doing.
Right. And it's just depending on the calculations, but yeah, they pay for it.
Because the pipe they put in may carry their flow, but whatever may come next the pipe that's in the ground now may not be able to handle that, so then they'd have to.
Okay.
It's better if they talk and when they know that something's coming, but we can't necessarily control that. Because then we don't gotta dig up a road twice.
And so that
Yeah.
replaces the on-site system they would have to have, or that's the additional off-site?
Could be either,
Okay,
could be either.
Okay.
Just a very site and project dependent.
okay. And then if you guys don't mind, this is a very specific question, so if you'd rather answer it later, let me give you a call or email. So Bamboo Courts on Pendleton Road, they have a discharge pond, or a detention pond or retention pond, discharge right at the sidewalk that is about 10 feet from a stormwater drain, and it doesn't hit it. It comes across the road, and then to the other side, it's the bike path across Augusta and then down into 101 Augusta. Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's, as part, and I'm asking this as part of the review and overview or whatever, like, if you guys do inspections and stuff, like, I'm sure their pond out back or whatever is still good and everything, but stuff like that, and I know that's a state road, I think, so that's probably the issue of, like, how that lines up, because I know I've talked to a few people where that's a thing, and they're like, hey, why can't this happen? I mean, the storm drain's literally, 10 or 15 feet from that pipe, and it just doesn't hit it. It goes all the way across the road and floods out the road in bad rain.
Yeah, so that was built before I was here, or the first phase, and all the detention structures were put in. They've added a few of the townhomes later. Yeah, that gets really tricky because Pendleton Road is a state-owned road. There's a lot of state-owned roads throughout our city, and when the state owns the road, they also own the drainage. So Pendleton Road, Rock Creek, obviously 76, 123, 93. There's even a few small ones that you wouldn't even think are state roads. But yeah, that's kind of where it kind of gets a little hairy sometimes because DOT, if you're discharging to a DOT right of way, they have to approve it.
Okay.
And they will dictate what happens.
So you approve the system, like, essentially from the sidewalk back onto the property, and then DOT handles it from there? Or?
Yeah, but you don't get a permit unless DOT is willing to accept it. Because
No, yeah. I'm logistically speaking, like, situations like that, like.
I mean, we look at the downstream effect, but I cannot dictate someone else's system.
Right, since that's not part of your system, you can't not approve it because of X, Y, Z, or go out and inspect and say, hey, you guys are missing that, you need to get the state. I fully get it. That's what I'm trying to nail down here is, all right, if there's a problem from 3 inches left of the sidewalk, we call you guys. If there's a
That's
problem
correct.
from, this way to the other side of the sidewalk, then it's the state. And then you guys pick it back up on the other side of the sidewalk?
That's correct.
Okay.
But I will say, DOT has changed the way they handle that now. We had a similar development, it was the Mod Wash on 93.
Yep.
They wanted to just do an open drain onto 93 like that, and they said no, they made them build a whole new box and tie into their system. So I don't think that would occur again,
Okay.
a situation like that.
Well, because it just seems, I mean, and I don't know about the, sizing of the pipes or the flow they're designed to handle, but it's like, that's, like, is that just like somebody put too much dirt right here and we just need to scalp it? Or like, it's one of that, like, I don't, because that's what people say, they're like, oh, why don't you just go dig a hole in the weekend? I'm like, I may not be the answer. You may back this whole system up if you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I will say this. Also, DOT, they cover the whole, they're a county division. They cover the whole county.
Yeah.
We try to help them out on roads in our cities. So a lot of times when we get heavy flooding, because they're going other places, which is understandable.
Right.
But we'll help them out as much as we can, cleaning boxes and getting roads open back up. In fact, Berkeley and Issaquah are both DOT roads. That's where a lot of our worst flooding typically happens.
Yeah.
And so we'll shut down the road and handle all that for them, because we have a good relationship with them as well. I mean, we're all fighting the same battle. So.
I have one more question.
Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes when we talk about new development, the residents in Clemson, and I am one of those, that will be concerned that this development, that our stormwater drainage system can't handle this development. So whatever new development that comes before Planning Commission. So what I'm hearing you say is that you have a water drainage system in place, and y'all are not going to be approving if you can't handle the stormwater drainage. Or am I not hearing you correctly?
So I'll say it like this. If you guys approve something, if council approves something, they don't get a permit until they meet these requirements. Okay. That's the way it goes, a grading permit. So to answer your question, they have to meet these requirements, and the system has to be able to handle what's being built. Does that answer your question?
Yes. I mean, I would hope that's the case. I just need to see your eyes when I ask that.
You saw.
I tell people, a huge chunk of my job is telling people no, both from a developer to a citizen perspective. Is no, you can't do that. No, you have to go get a permit for that. And I try to be as nice about it as possible, but the rules are the rules, and the rules apply to everyone.
Yes. A side answer to that question may be that it's approved through here and by council, and that in order to be approved by Ethan, they may have to spend several $100,000 in engineering and offsite upgrades and before they have to design that before they can even apply for the permit to make sure it works. So yeah, I've heard that as well. So I think I'm glad you asked that.
Okay.
Great question. Are there any more questions? Because this has been great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for staying up to date on all of this and continuing doing what you do. And we appreciate you taking your evening to come enlighten us, and hopefully people who are watching can reference this meeting in the future to understand the depths of what you do. I will tell you that since he's gotten here, certain things on a personal level have gotten more stringent, which is fine, because I understand the why. And so there are a lot of requirements that are never seen that they do, even on existing properties, that when things change. And I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. And thank y'all for letting me come speak. If you ever have any other questions,
What's your email?
it's probably got some cards.
Okay.
I have one card, of course. But it's E Barnett, so it's EBarnette at cityofclemson.org. But you can also go to the website, go to the stormwater tab. There's my phone number's there, my email's there. My office is at the wastewater treatment plant down there. If you ever guys want to come visit and take a look at that, it's a whole different ballgame. One that I don't really help with that much because wastewater and stormwater don't mix. But I appreciate y'all coming. Feel free to reach out. If you ever need me to come back or anything, I'd be happy to. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. So with that, we're going to move to our action items. We have one action item tonight. The first action item on our agenda tonight is 2024-R-05, proposed text amendment, which is the grandfathering of nonconformities. We did have a discussion last meeting on that. This was, and I think Jacob can enlighten on this, a ask of city council from the public hearing when we were talking about one specific rezoning parcel. And so I'm sure he can expound on that.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So we were talking about legal pre-existing non-conforming conditions, otherwise known as grandfathered rights. And as Herb alluded to, this kind of stems, the reason why this is before us is we had proposed that zone change to try to bring certain properties into conformity over on 76. At that time, the city council instructed us they were not wanting to do any zone changes at this time while we're going through this comprehensive plan process, and they would appreciate if we would move forward with a grandfathering ordinance that covered all non-conforming uses and structures to kind of do a stopgap measure and band-aid so that we make sure that the city doesn't get in trouble and any property owners are protected in the meantime. So that is where we landed. At that meeting, a concerned citizen, Fran McGuire, brought a copy of the Cambridge ordinance, and that was well received, so we used that as our template to go off of for this ordinance. And that is where we're at. So this would protect all non-conforming structures and uses in every zone that if they were destroyed by non-voluntary actions of the property owner or their representatives could be rebuilt.
And that was, we discussed that last time, I believe. I rewatched the meeting that happened in the public hearing and listened to Fran again, as well as Councilman Brookover, Councilman Boatwright, Councilman Duckworth, Councilman Watt, and they all agreed that we need something so people can get insured if something happens within the same footprint.
Yes, because right now we had certain things that there was no mechanism for them to rebuild, and then in certain zoning districts they would need a special exemption. And special exemptions are nerve-wracking for agencies like mortgage companies, insurance companies, because you don't know how it's going to come out. And it also puts a lot of pressure onto a board like a zoning board that, you know, when something like this happens, say there is a fire, now all of a sudden all these people are running to them trying to get these special exemptions, and there might be a whole other group of concerned citizens trying to say, no, we don't want this to be rebuilt. And that puts, you know, it would be better to legislate it ahead of time than have it when there is an emergency, that's when it's decided on what we're going to be doing in these situations. So that is where we have the ordinance now in front of you.
So at this time, are there any members of the public that would like to comment or anything like that, discussion? Seeing none, we'll move to discussion with the board here. Are there any questions on this ordinance or comments? And we'll go one commissioner at a time.
I saw Buzz's hand first.
Okay, suppose you have a non-conforming building and it changes ownership. And the new owner, say, may change the business, the enterprise that's being conducted there, and wants to make just cosmetic changes to the building. Would this apply to them, the grandfathering?
Okay, so we'd have to know exactly what you mean by what was, is the building itself is the nonconformity?
I would presume so, yes.
So say it's either too tall, built too close to the property lines. In that case, if the proposed cosmetic changes were not increasing the nonconformity, So if the use that is being moved into there is a allowed use for that district, and the proposed cosmetic changes are, again, not increasing the nonconformity, say it's a setback issue, it's too close to the property line, but nothing there increasing would increase the nonconformity, then yes, that would be eligible for approval. But if they're increasing the nonconformity, they're asking to go, say it's already 75 feet tall and they're trying to go 80 feet, then no.
Yeah.
Good question.
So I don't know. I've got a slight, I mean, I kind of mentioned in the email I sent you guys, but the slight concern on this is, one, how permanent is this grandfathering? Because with the comp plan and stuff coming up, I don't want to set in stone necessarily a non-conforming use, but still find a way to be fair to people who currently own. In other words, grandfathering to a current owner, sure, if your place burns down or you need to refinance or you need insurance, you can get these rights, but it will not forever transfer with the sale of property or things like that. Just from the brief overview of this, if we wanted to look into this, I would think we would need to go further into where all it applies, kind of like we would do with a zoning application. You know, this is a site-specific thing, they want to rezone to here, here's where it is, here's where it's going to affect, and those types of deals. Now, that's not meaning to like, oh, let's be unfair to people, like, because this all started with the small development, you know, over there, and it's like, oh, if this burns down, it can't be rebuilt. Well, it can be rebuilt, it just has to go through a process, and that process would just could create issues from a financing standpoint or possibly an insurance standpoint. Which is what to address this without going full on here, this is there forever as long as whoever owns it, whether it's now or a new owner 20 years from now, gets to keep doing that. I always imagined the idea of grandfathering was to protect a current person from an unfair taking of some sort. Joe's had a gas station for 40 years over there. We want this to be a residential neighborhood. We're not going to make Joe close his gas station so he gets to keep running his gas station. But if the gas station leaves the family, like Joe can leave it to his kids or things like that, but if they sell it to Exxon or whatever, then Exxon can't operate a gas station there anymore because Exxon didn't originally open it and wouldn't be taking anything from them to convert it to whatever.
But wouldn't it be taking, because then he can't sell it as a gas station?
Exactly.
Yeah, he now has to sell it as a home.
Right, but nobody in the neighboring properties could sell theirs as a gas station either, which was the idea of zoning. So in other words, if I had it, so like.
No, but Joe owned the gas station, and then we all changed the zoning while he was owning the gas station to now single-family homes. Now he can't sell it as a gas. So we've taken something.
Right, but once upon a time, we could build anything we wanted to, anywhere we wanted to. So walking that path is eventually, if you say we have to do this or else it's a taking, then something has already been taken from anybody here that owns property.
I actually disagree with you. I think what council is asking for, because they made it very clear, and I think we've talked about with the comprehensive plan is the big view, which I know you know it because you looked through it. The zoning is how we get there, but what's happened over time, the reason we're in nonconformities is because over time, and I can't tell you the time, we downzone so much for whatever reason over time. What they're asking for, it would be the same thing. Let's say my home, okay? If you're saying I'm the only one that can build it back, if something happens to it and I want to go to sell it, my home's not sellable. If the zoning, if it was changed,
Yeah, that's how I'm seeing
my
it.
home is not sellable. And so until we review what the intent that city council asked for, is they want something to protect people immediately before catastrophe like the tornado in Seneca hit happens here that could hurt that. I don't disagree that we need to look at overall zoning.
That gets to the original part of my question was how permanent is this grandfather? At what point can I say nope, we're taking away your grandfathering because we gave it to you to hold on until now. But now we're gonna redo it in grandfather.
At any point, the ordinance can be changed.
So at any point, you can say, sorry, you can't build a gas station. You can't still operate your gas station.
If that is the ordinance, if that's how you want to change the grandfather ordinance, and that's what you want to put in place, yes, you could you could sunset grandfather rights. This doesn't change that. I mean, at any point you can change this ordinance to go back to what it was. I mean, this ordinance went from one way and then it got stricter. You know, it put in the whole having to get a special exemption for the residential thing a couple of years ago, and then this would be kind of going back to being less, I guess we'll say, restrictive.
Okay.
But it can change and modify as the council at that time sees fit.
And
Right now,
that's not considered a taking to then just remove somebody.
Anything can be considered takings. I mean.
Well, that's what I'm,
Well, I mean,
that's
this
what I'm
doesn't-
getting.
This doesn't make it more of a takings. The takings is if somebody tries to do something and we.
Because there's a big kerfuffle about this in town right now, but not this, because that's why I'm saying is, can we find an answer to protect the people that need protecting right now without making anything too permanent or hard to deal with later? Because I'm pretty sure the whole crux of the development over at the core was a taking issue of, you guys downzoned us, we can't build what we would, you took away what we had, but we just rezoned them.
And it wouldn't make any difference of what our grandfathering ordinance said in that case. How would that make any difference?
That's because by grandfathering it, we're saying this is yours, we're saying you by right, you don't have to have approval, there's no mechanism for the city to say this use doesn't exist anymore on this property. By right, whoever owns that property can rebuild this building or put this use here, period.
Yes, most of the time grandfathered rights do go with the property, not the ownership. Almost never do they not because of the legal implications.
Okay.
Very rarely I've never seen an ordinance have that, but.
I mean,
I know we've talked about it, but it's never been enacted because it's.
Commissioner Buxton?
So then, if somebody else wants to do something completely different with the property, then boom, all the grandfather rights they vanish. If they want to do the same thing, they can do it.
Correct. Yeah, so once you change, so say it's a grandfather, a use issue. If you change uses, you gave up those grandfather rights.
Oh, yeah.
But, I mean, I don't see, right now, these instructions were they did not want us going through parcel by parcel and determining, bringing things into conformity and what is that appropriate. At this point, council wanted a blanket one to make sure that for right now, everyone is protected where they are. At least what we have in place is in place. That's how I understood it from the meeting.
So
Commissioner Paxson, let me
Go ahead.
ask her, then we'll go back to whoever.
I guess I'm a little confused, mainly because when we did that, I don't know, what was it, the visioning workshop for the comprehensive plan. And we had these huge maps and we had our markers, and it was kind of brought to you as, well, in 50 years, 75 years, what do you see the city of Clemson looking like? And take into account that things are going to change, just because this might be an old bylaw, it could be anything you can imagine. And, we laid all that out. So I guess, to me, my question is, this right here would basically say that that wouldn't happen, or that they could be grandfathered in, and that place might not ever change, no matter what the comprehensive plan says.
The comprehensive plan at no point ever controls what people's private property does.
Right, but
It
if
makes
it were
the
to
opportunity for-
change and sell, that this lets them lock in some of the older property, I don't know.
Well,
The old
they've
bylaw, I
always
don't know.
done this. The only thing changes here is if it's destroyed by a fire or some sort of natural disaster.
Okay.
I mean, they were always operating. So bylaw went up as soon as bylaw. So say we ban grocery stores, okay?
Okay, yes.
Say where bylaw was banned grocery stores. They're not a grocery store anymore, so they can't go back in.
Okay.
That's gone. So the second that closed down, they lost their grandfather rights.
But if they were operating as a grocery
If they were
store, they
operating a
could
grocery store, and someone else
continue
bought it,
being.
and you came back in, yeah, they could. And
If
say
they caught
AM,
fire,
you
they
know,
would
Stop and
build
Shop,
it back.
A&P, or Publix bought them, they could switch over. But if they went defunct and sat there, like right now, say we change the
Yeah.
rules, no longer allowed there, they can't, this would not protect, this doesn't say, okay, a grocery store can go back in there.
Okay. I don't know.
Commissioner Hyatt? You got another question?
I think my concern was just like a natural disaster.
Yeah, that's really all it's doing, non-voluntary actions. So shutting down is a voluntary action.
Okay.
Sorry, didn't mean to step on top of you.
Yeah, I don't know. And then the economics of the town would make certain businesses go out of business, and it would then potentially change versus, I don't want someone's property to burn down and then now you're in a bind. That seems like that's a problem, but
I think that was,
I just thought this was like kind of easy, and then now I'm like,
Well, that was my,
made it a little more difficult.
Let's take it back to the townhomes of why this started originally. You correct me, you cannot build those back.
Correct.
If the townhomes on 76 today, that's where this all started from.
And we all said, hey, those people need to be able to build it back.
Correct.
So we need
But
to
we
change
tried
the
to do-
zoning.
So, yes, and so what we did there was Jacob and staff and planning commission thought RM4 was appropriate there because there were 4-bedroom townhomes in that thing. At city council, on account of public comment, that because that's a 23-acre parcel, it was brought up in front of the city council that if we went RM4, you could theoretically, with enough millions of dollars and enough grading equipment, put that as high-density residential to create, I think the number was thrown out, over 1,000 bedrooms there. Theoretically, that is true if you change it to RM4. I was not at that discussion, but I watched it several times. Since then, what came out of that meeting, though, was council asking, well, is there another way to tackle this problem? And that was, let's, across the board, grandfather legal non-conforming uses. Those townhomes are one example. Jacob can probably think of 50 off the top of his head, but let's say Abernathy Hotel can't be rebuilt. If it were to fall down tomorrow, can't be rebuilt because we've downzoned since it was built. Bixby can't be rebuilt if it fell down tomorrow because we've downzoned since then.
Dockside, but
Dockside.
then there's also hundreds of houses that I'm probably not even aware of that. Well, the biggest one I always see everywhere is illegal parking spaces. Like, right, I know they're parking that is like much closer to the house. Houses are pushed up closer and there's parking up close to the road that's not allowed in a thing.
So what we've done as a city over time is down zone, and where this becomes a problem, mainly it's a headache internally, is when developments sell, they ask Jake for a zoning letter. And when he writes them back and says, this can't be rebuilt, in terms, their insurance comes back and says, you're uninsurable, and then we get in this big kerfuffle. And luckily, we haven't had any real, to my knowledge, since I've been here, legal implications from it, but we do want to make, again, going back to the townhomes, it's originally.
Because that's where it started.
We just want them to be able to be rebuilt if they fall down.
right.
Yeah.
And I understand the density. I mean, I understand what he's talking
Absolutely.
about. Like, that makes sense, that do we want to rezone something
Yeah.
and it becomes.
Well, we had, Jacob specifically, we had brought this to planning commission, or at least talked it through in the past several times, never dreaming that it was possible. I mean, this is I'm not gonna advocate, but I mean, I think this is good for property owners and for internal functioning.
Well, that's, I mean, I'm sorry,
Hey, I'm done, yeah.
so that's what I mean, so there's, I guess that's the concern of the overarching stuff is where it started versus where we are, and I understand that council, let's handle it all in one shot, and I get the appeal of quick and done and easy, but I don't know that we all necessarily, at least I didn't until very recently, fully understand the large impact of what this is versus what we've been talking about since May of we need to get these people able to rebuild in case they have a travesty, which was like, great, let's do that. But like was just mentioned, what was mentioned was, let's let these big developments be able to sell to a different owner easier. First, like that, do you see how it's shifted a little
No,
bit?
that's not,
I don't know, I understand it still addresses the original problem, but I didn't, like, couldn't we just either simplify the current statute that says that the residential stuff zoned in R20, R12, RM1, and R2 can be rebuilt, it just has to get a special exemption. So we can, I mean,
The special exemption is where the entities like insurance companies, them, are scared because that's not saying they can be rebuilt.
and this is not large development. I mean, we could be talking about a townhome
Yeah.
that is grandfathered in a area where we have,
that's what I'm saying is I understand that that's the issue is that we originally started talking was that special exemption for the residential districts. And why we cannot either simply remove that for just the residential districts for now, and then wait for this larger citywide everything until the comp plan review is coming through and things like that, or do, whatever makes it easier for the group that was originally, because nobody, you've said developers have, but how many citizens, individual homeowners have come forward and say, I need a letter from my bank to buy this house that needs a special exemption?
It is very rare because I don't think they even know.
So that's what I mean, is like, and I understand that if the house burns, that's when you find out it's a problem. I
I
get.
gotta tell you, I've had that instance working my job before where someone came in to rebuild and I had to tell them no.
Right, and I get that. That's my point of, can't we just address what we set out to address?
I think that's what this does.
Well, let
It
me,
may not address what you want to address, but I think it addresses what council wants to address.
Right, but that's what I'm saying is what you guys brought to us originally and what council has sent back as an ask are two different things.
Yes.
We were asked to address a small neighborhood over here, and council has come back, and that's what I'm saying is I don't know that I am comfortable with the comp plan and everything coming up, addressing something of this scope without, one, with the comp plan coming up, but two, without looking further into, okay, what all implications does this have? How hard really, and not somebody's word of it, but how hard is this really to change later versus a zoning thing versus, and I don't mean, yes, here's the ordinance, we take a vote, it's passed, great. But then if we get our britches sewed off and it has to go back, how many, like, that's what I'm saying when we say we got to look at the real impact of it.
I really think that the real lawsuit I'm worried about is a dockside, a Bixby burning down, and us saying, no, you can't rebuild. That's the lawsuit I'm worried about.
Aren't they insured currently?
I have no clue.
I mean, unless somebody paid cash for it, I assume it
the
would.
deal is this, and I think the deal is
The
this.
insurance company would come.
The deal is this, if the intent is not to allow a Bixby or a dockside to rebuild, we're having the wrong discussion.
Yeah.
The discussion that because you keep going to the developers, I'll go as a small business. If my place burns down with the new change in the overlay district, you would make me have to change my requirements, and my requirements on that footprint, it would be impossible, financially impossible for me to meet that. And so you're not just talking about this, you're talking about everybody, because that overlay district has been pulled off. And I actually do not want this to become anything but what it is a short term, is what council said. And then there is money in the budget for next year, because we keep talking about comprehensive plan, and Nathan will be able to give us a little bit of update, but there also is money in the budget to look at all of this zoning to figure this out. I mean, that's what I see. And when I went and rewatched that meeting today, this is exactly what council is asking us for.
Let me rephrase that. And this might, so how is giving them this for now, I see how that makes it easier to get insurance, mortgage, whatever. But how is then rezoning later not put them in the same situation they are right now? When you're saying, oh, we can just get rid of it later if we want to.
Yeah.
But that puts them back in this same situation.
Only if
It depends on how you're rewording it. Like, I'd have to know exactly what we're changing everything to. I want to try to avoid situations where we are
Taking.
taking, but also creating non-conforming conditions if
Right.
we need to.
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at is, does this necessarily incentivize continuing nonconformities versus bringing things into conformity?
Well, hopefully that when we go through the zoning, so comprehensive plan is one thing. After that is when we go through all the zoning.
Right.
Totally separate. And hopefully we come out with very few nonconformities.
But the issue with that would be, we would have to take the recommendation from the zoning, which the reason we got to that zoning was down zoning. We may have to take the recommendation of that, and if the recommendation, let's just say, was RM4, then to get it into compliance would be changing that zoning.
Correct.
Now, if we're don't have, which is fine, because I haven't seen it, and y'all know more about zoning than I do, but it's only non-conforming when it doesn't meet a zoning part that doesn't exist anymore. So like, there's no R16 here,
Yep.
right? And so the issue is once you examine it, then that becomes the issue for council to decide. And if they want to change this again, they can go back and change this ordinance too. But for me, this delivers, and I watched it again this afternoon, what they're asking for. And every one of them, there are 4 that spoke on it, and everybody else said yes. That's what we want. And that's how I look at it. And I'm not, it's okay to disagree. I just don't think we can pick and choose who gets what. I
do want to bring up, John, to your point of like how identifying them, I'm not sure how.
Well, uses versus buildings versus this or that. I mean, it just like with the comp plan, with like I was saying, and I get it. Sure, we can go in as a council and vote and say, yep, we're rezoning this. You guys got to close tomorrow, and I'm sorry you're not allowed to have your grocery store there anymore. That's it, period. We can, but does anybody here really believe that'll stand? That's my point. That's what I'm saying when I say before we give somebody something of this magnitude.
But this doesn't let someone create a new use.
No.
They're already there doing it right now.
Right. The person who owns it is there doing it now, and if they had a fire, they could rebuild. That's what I'm saying is
There's nothing in our current ordinance that says that when you sell a property, you lose your grandfather rights. It still continues.
right, but it has to go through the thing. Is that not what it says right there? It has
It does
to.
not say that when you sell a property, it needs to go through a special exemption. There's nothing about that in there.
No, to keep the grandfather transfers, but if something happens to it, then it has to go through.
If it burns, yeah, if it's destroyed by something like that, but that has nothing to do with sale. Nothing to do with sale whatsoever.
What
I
I
think
think,
what-
go ahead.
Go ahead. No, you go first.
I think we need to examine our heart, because if we're sitting here wanting a building to burn down so that it doesn't get rebuilt as that same building, it says a lot about who we are. And that's where I struggle with this, because you're talking about someone owns a building and it gets burned down, they can or cannot build it back the way it is. And I find it bothersome that we hate something so badly that we wish it to burn down.
That is in no way, shape, or form what I'm saying. That is not at all. All I'm saying is that this ordinance is so much bigger than what we started with in May. That having the quick discussion of, yeah, this sounds great. That's how you run into future problems. This sounds like a great idea. Let's just do it. The one over there, here's the parcels, they're defined. Should we rezone these? Absolutely, we all agree. Let's handle that and get it done. What's come back is something completely different. And I'm happy to cut it off after this and we can vote and do whatever. I am not sitting here saying I want somebody's building to burn down. All I'm saying is this is a lot bigger. I'm asking, especially with the zoning issues in town of, you took this from me and you get that. This is something we're giving people. Grandfathered, no application process. That's it. I'm asking, okay, if we give this to people, just like if we were to rezone downtown and say, during December, everybody gets 12 stories. And then in January, we say you get 5. You gave it and take, that's what I'm asking for, is how hard is this to redo, to incorporate the comprehensive large
I
plan?
don't think it changes your liability in any way if you, in the future, rezone a property. I don't see how this would have any effect from a liability point of view. We can ask our attorneys to weigh in on that, but I don't see how that is relevant at
I think all we're doing is, I think at the end of the day, all this says is that you can do what's there now.
That's it.
Okay.
And in the future, we might change what is allowed there and what isn't and not, but that's down the road. But I don't think that this affects that in any way.
Okay.
Any other comments?
I just have one question. So if it's vacant, how does this apply to that?
Well, so vacant, you lose the use, but
Okay.
if the nonconformity is the structure,
Okay.
then you would maintain it.
Okay.
So it all depends on what is your nonconformity. Because again,
Right.
I can have a nonconformity that is where your parking spaces are, or I can have a nonconformity that is your landscaping, or I can have a nonconformity that is your shed in your backyard. It all depends on those, or it can be that you have a, auto repair business in a residential district. Those are all things that could be nonconformity, but it matters if it's use, all that type of things, but.
We do have, that's actually a good example, we do have some auto repair locations, I'm thinking off of 76, where they're in a residential district, and then that guy retires and passes to another, so that's being able to pass the business down would fall underneath this as well.
Yes, it would.
But I thought the shed, or one of you said the shed, that's a good one too. It's like, so if you have your setbacks are non-conforming in your shed and your falls down, this says you can rebuild your shed, correct?
That's correct, if it was burnt down. See, maintenance is usually, I consider that to not be an act of God. That is your own, if you let your shed just deteriorate to a point it
Tree falls on your
if
shed,
a tree falls on your
you
shed,
can
that's
rebuild your shed. But if we currently, without this, Jacob has to say no.
That's correct.
And the hard part of it is, just like you were saying, John, it started over with those apartments. If I would have gone and bought one, I'd have never thought to ask about it.
Right.
Not that I'm gonna go buy one, but if I would have. So
And-
I think personally, and I think we need to, unless there's any other strong discussion that needs to go on, I think this meets what the council people at that discussion and the public that spoke at that hearing asked us to do temporarily to ensure. Here, I do believe that everybody here is interested in ensuring that we do have the right strategies, long-term, comprehensive plan, and that's why council asked for it to be done a different way this time. But that's also why they budgeted to incorporate the zoning look in all of these areas as well. So for me, that's what I see, and it's okay to disagree. I actually believe the intent of this, that council would act to change this if it didn't meet the intent of what they said that night. So with that, it's time for us to have action. Is there a motion?
Can I make a motion that we table this to gather more information until the next meeting?
You can make that motion. Is there a second?
I second the motion to table this until the next meeting.
Is there any discussion?
I need to know what, okay,
Go ahead.
I have no clue what you guys want us to research.
And that's what I was getting ready to say in my discussion. What is it that in here that would need to change, that we're asking them, meaning zoning, what is it that needs to change? Because that's it. I mean, so I'd like to hear what needs to change.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we vote today for or, accepting this or recommending it or not recommending it, it still goes to council.
Yes.
Okay. So,
But we have a separate motion on the
Okay.
table right now.
I'll be happy to withdraw that motion.
so what's gonna
You
happen?
have to vote on the motion.
We do have to vote on the
I
motion.
can't withdraw the motion.
No, because we've already had a second and we're in the middle of discussion, so we'll have to vote on it.
So as far as discussion goes, I'm just interested in how many areas there actually are that meet this non-conformance. I seconded it just to give us more time to figure that out, to see what
Okay.
we're really dealing with.
So I would very literally have to go through every single property in the city to make that determination. So I would have to go a site visit to thousands of properties to determine if they're non-conforming or not, because there are non-conformities on lots of properties. Some of them are fence heights, fence locations, some of them are parking spaces, some of them are sheds, some of them are all sorts of, setbacks. It's an enormous task.
That's why I chimed in a minute ago. I don't think that as a staff, or even if we were to hire 10 of us, that's actually possible. Because I'm not sure how,
That gives me more
we would
information.
literally- yeah, I think we
that
would
you're
literally be out there with a measuring wheel on every parcel in the city.
But like some of the examples were like huge like structures and things, but that's the kind of information that I was kind of looking for. I was like, so you're talking fences,
Yeah, the majority of them are gonna be
the
single-family
shed.
houses.
The shed rebuild makes a lot of sense. You brought up the auto repair in residential areas, so my question's more of like, so long range, is that what we want, or do you want that to eventually get phased out of a residential area and not rebuilt as that if it were to occur? I don't know, and
And that's the thing is, and you can more fine tune these ordinances in the future if you want, when you determine which, areas are, an issue, I guess.
And I guess that's the part I don't quite understand is like, this feels like grandfathering it protects it permanently. But you're saying it doesn't, but
Doesn't.
I thought that's what grandfathering does for it.
I mean,
We're-
all these properties are already grandfathered in. There's nothing that changes them from stopping out what they're currently doing.
Right.
But if it stops for any reason, then it can't start back up.
So with your example of an automotive shop, which I think you're talking about Jerry Kane's on,
Yeah.
it's what you're talking about. If that is a residential area, it'll be very interesting to see if somebody's not gonna come buy it for residential with the way prices in land is. But again, he could sell it the other way if he wanted it to remain that way, or give it to a nephew or a son. So for me, delaying this really is not gonna give us any more information to make a decision on what council asked us to
And again, this is
And
only.
our decision isn't the final decision. The final decision is with council.
And what I would tell you is any final decision is
with
with
council.
council.
Yep.
And this is only from an act of God. I think we need to go back to that too. Like,
Say that again?
this is only from an act of God. So let's go back to the auto shop story.
Okay.
If it's struck by lightning and a tree next door is struck by lightning and a tree falls on it, then it can be rebuilt as a auto body shop.
And that's really the only instances we're talking about, this whole ordinance.
Yeah, only act of God.
And like,
That might have got misconstrued, but the only thing we're talking about is if something not of the owner's own volition happens to that property, then in that instance, it can be rebuilt as it stands today. That's all this does.
So that means a property owner has a nonconformity in, say, use or something, he can't sell it to another person who will do the same, who will use it in the same manner.
No, he can't.
no, he can.
Yes.
He can, and he can do that under the current ordinance, how it is right now.
If it's the same business,
Same business, yes. So, but say the auto repair shop, say he wants to sell it, but the next guy wants to be a grain feed store. He can't do that.
But it could be a paint body shop.
No,
No, it has to be an
it
auto.
has to be the exact same thing.
has to be
We had,
exactly
we
what.
had, I had a situation where I had somebody who wanted to come in and change it from a vehicle repair shop to a heavy machinery repair shop. We denied that because we felt there was too much of a change in use. Grandfather rights are very tight.
Okay.
It is what you have to prove that you have been doing that.
And what it's saying is, let's say the lot is weird. Let's go continue with the auto body shop. The lot's weird, so it has a weird setback.
Okay.
Jacob would approve it with the non-conforming weird setback as an auto body shop, exactly as it stood before, and not require him to then meet the setbacks to have a smaller auto body shop because it's out of compliance.
So you wouldn't lose square footage?
Honestly,
Okay.
I'm not even, I'd have to go see, like, you're talking, is this over like Pendleton, kind of like going off the
That's what I thought.
But yeah, but there are maybe none commercial businesses in a residential district I know of. I can't think of any, honestly. There may be the ones over there on off of.
Okay, I'd have to check the zoning. That actually might be.
I think it
zone
might be
commercial.
commercial, but
Oh,
what are you talking about? But I don't know of any. We have, thank God, like most towns I've worked for, we have tons of non-conforming uses of commercial in residential. We really don't have too many of them around here. It's mostly structures. It's mostly, houses with setback issues is our main thing. And,
If you think about it, that's largely our zoning's worked over time. I mean, our commercial is where our commercial is, and our residential is where our residential is.
I can tell you a very specific case I ran into where I had a non-conforming structure where a tree took it down. The insurance would only pay for the building. They refused to pay for the foundation because the foundation wasn't damaged in it, okay? But I couldn't let them rebuild on the foundation because it wasn't in the right spot. So that gets you into a whole slew of situation.
The motion before us, Adam, if
Well,
we,
I was gonna get some clarification on that because we said there was a motion, but I believe what I specifically said is, can I make a motion?
I believe you said a motion, I believe she seconded it.
I think she seconded my question. That's what I was
Let's
asking. That's what I'm,
For
I know we don't
whatever-
have instant replay, but I'm just curious.
Let's just take a vote on the
I think-
table.
Well, if we take the vote on tabling, then
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
we can take
Yes.
another
That's what we
motion?
have to do, yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
fine. I just want to make sure it didn't
Okay.
disappear after this.
Right, no, it doesn't. We have to act
Right.
on the first question, that since the first question was changed to a different order of business, we have to vote on that by Robert's Rules of Order, and then we have to go back and take up the action item again.
Okay.
That's how it works. So I'm gonna go ahead and call for a vote, and let's do a roll call vote on the motion to table this until the next meeting, and we'll do it one at a time. All in favor of tabling it? We'll do one at a time. Answer yes if you're in favor of tabling it. If you're not, answer no. Commissioner Hyatt.
No.
Commissioner Crowley.
No.
Commissioner Thaxton.
No.
Commissioner Burton.
No.
Commissioner Herb. No. Now that that action is done, we're back to the original question.
All right.
The original question is proposed 2024-R05, proposed text amendment, grandfathering nonconformities, as written here. Do we have a motion?
So I move that we accept 2024 R05 proposed text amendment grandfathering nonconformities. Move that we accept it as written.
Is there a second?
I second it.
Okay, we have a second. Is there any discussion?
I think we let council sort it out. Any concerns I had have been voiced. I think everybody has to let council sort it out.
Well, I think there's some discussion. I don't think that's fair to you and fair to planning if there's still other concerns, and then we can vote on it.
That's I think I raised all the concerns, and I feel like everybody's discussed them thoroughly, and everybody has, I think that's fine. At this point, I think going to send it to council is fine.
Okay.
And I just want to say, I feel more comfortable now having more information and understanding the different implications of a lot versus all the different things that are actually in this, as far as the use versus a lot versus the structure and the acts of God and whatnot.
And I just want to say for the record, that was my intent with this discussion, was of how much larger this was than where we set out. It was in no way, shape, or form wishing harm on anybody, person, use, building, or anything in town.
Thank you for that clarification. We have a motion on the table. We will do a roll call vote. If you're in favor of accepting 2024-R-05 proposed text amendment, grandfathering nonconformities as written, answer yes. If not, answer no. Commissioner Hyatt?
Yes.
Commissioner Crowley?
Yes.
Commissioner Thaxton?
Yes.
Commissioner Burton?
Yes.
As chair, Commissioner Herb, yes. We have a unanimous decision to send this to council as written. With that, we'll move on. Are there any advisory items?
No advisory.
Okay. Any other discussion items from staff? Any staff reports?
Yeah, you mentioned comprehensive plan, and I will tell you that what staff has recently done in conjunction with the consultant is we currently received that we worked on together, but a draft vision goals and the preliminary land use map from the consultant. We, as you can imagine, had lots of comments and went through several Zoom calls with them. So the next step is we will send that to once they take into account our comments, we will send that to each of you as well as council. And then the next step will be another steering committee meeting, between which the steering committee, if you'll remember, is planning commission and council joint together to do that. After that discussion, we will hold a community input session on those vision goals and objectives as well. So that's where we are. We hope to schedule, there's obviously a lot going on with school, but we're trying to schedule up travel to get that meeting on the calendars. Worst case scenario, I think that's probably a session we could do Zoom, but the consultant has requested to come into town and probably do it in here like we've done some of the ones previously.
Any other items? Any planning commission representation at council meetings?
Jacob will take this.
Yeah,
No,
I'll
no,
take
no,
this
no.
one up.
Yeah, I'm sorry. He will take this to the next council meeting, and you took,
I just did the, what the,
So you forward with the,
my next one's the bond one. The parking was well received, I think, at the first meeting, but we're just scheduling the public hearing for that. And then the next one we're bringing from them is the bond for a commercial. And then we'll take this one in from.
yeah, they said October the 7th, 5:30 is the public hearing. The ad went out to the paper today, so for some reason I can remember October the 7th. It's at 5:30, so that's the first council meeting, prior to the first council meeting in October. It'll be the public hearing on the parking requirements in the area down along the lake.
Gotcha. Any other items? Well, with that, do we have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All in favor, raise your right hand. Thank you.